you two are going to have to do this with interpretive dance, so do either of you want the clicker? Or do you prefer without it?
I think I should be alright.
Alright. If you need it, it's up here.
I'd
Okay.
just like to apologise in advance. I'm a little bit nervous, so that stumbled.
You'll be fine, you'll be fine. Alright, so welcome everyone to our 2022 BCM Honours Presentation Day. I'm Chris Comerford. I'm the coordinator of the Honours Program for the BCM, and we are very lucky not only to have our two presenters, Hannah and Daisy, our awesome Honours student. Did I say our awesome Hannah's student? One is an awesome Hannah's student. We also have guests from all over in academia and friends and families. Thank you everyone for coming along today. We'll go with Hannah's first and then run through Daisy's presentation after. So the presentations go for about 20 minutes apiece, and then we'll have about 15-20 minutes afterwards for Q&A. Both are coming to this in different stages of their candidature as well. So Daisy is neck deep in drafting her first thesis draft. She's at about the halfway point. And Hannah has already submitted hers, but has an eye towards potentially doing more after honours comes back. So maybe a PhD or a master's.
Yes, I have decided actually.
Excellent.
Yes.
What have you decided?
I want to do my PhD.
Fantastic. Love it. Love it. So feedback on both ends is greatly appreciated. Any questions you've got, any pointers you can give, all of that, very, very appreciated. So, Hannah, your project on Dungeons and Dragons, give me 1 second to get my
Good.
stuff set up. And then, we'll be all good.
Cool.
So I'll flash you like a 1 or a 2 when you're a couple minutes after the end.
Alright, so.
Alright, ready, steady?
Alright.
Alright. You ready?
Alright, welcome everyone to my presentation on the application of moral and ethical systems in tabletop and digital Dungeons and Dragons. I'd just like to start by just asking if anyone knows what D&D is. Yeah, Daisy?
I haven't played it, unfortunately, but it's pretty much a tabletop role-playing game, right? So you're playing a character and you roll dice to decide what will happen in all the different scenarios within your gaming story.
Yeah, 100%. Spot on. Yeah, it's a fantasy-based role-playing game where players adopt roles in a fictional setting, and they connect with the existing backstories and the motivations of their characters. So there's a lot of different types of RPGs. We've got MMO RPGs, which is like massively multiplayer online RPGs like League of Legends, Japanese role-playing games or JRPGs, and there's the computer role-playing game or CRPG, many of which you may recognize here. Within RPGs, I often play characters that are lawful and somewhat good. The closest that I really got to evil was Aeropress, the neutral evil rogue halfling. And although I labelled her as neutral evil, I only played her for a few sessions. So she didn't really embody evilness in the way that I wanted her to. And then we have Sparky, my current character, which I feel like best embodies the law-abiding goodness that my characters usually stand. So when I finally got the chance to explore what evil really means in my case studies, I grabbed it by the throat. My character, who is a kobold from the Death Domain, his name is Fern. And the best way that I can introduce Fern is an anecdote from the final session of the campaign, which is called Wild Beyond Launchlight. So as me and my teammates traverse the House of Horrors with creaky glass mirrors and unstable floors, with towering monsters of grass sludge, myself, Fern, and my teammate Nova traverse through this circus hall trying to find Ahenobarbus. When suddenly, deep within the sludge, I find him suffocating. What do? Do I help him? Do I offer my hand? Or do I pretend that I didn't see him? So I stomp forward through the mud and Nova asks, "Did you see anything?" I said, I kind of heard something say, but it was probably just the mud monster, so we should just go with it. This willing ignorance that I thought was quite selfish and mean, letting my teammate die, caused Nova, the player playing Nova, to just laugh. He thought it was quite funny. And then, in contrast, we have a player from the Baldur's Gate 3 CRPG, Feyre. I wanted her to be quite independent and egocentric, but it didn't exactly go according to plan because she failed most of her dexterity checks and ended up being put in her place by an equally as rude and egocentric high elf rogue. On one hand, we have the ability to search the caravan of the sketchy circus owner, and then on the others, I ended up getting myself into a useless combat session because I tried to warn some villagers of the powers of a mind flayer. In TV and games, we often empathise with evil characters, not because we condone their behaviour, but because we recognise their moral complexity. Loki, for example, is quite selfish, he's arrogant, he's cowardly, he's the god of mischief and a cunning trickster. He betrays his own loved ones to further his own goals. Zuko, who is Fire Nation royalty, is a representation of resentment and impatience. We play evil because it allows us to experiment with actions that we wouldn't normally do in real life. In the same vein, we often have trouble playing easy characters because it's easy to intertwine our own moral and ethical codes with these characters. My thesis aims to challenge this. As you can see, the progression of my thesis, research, and my respective case studies, I was able to examine what it really means to play an evil character and how alignment, or the 9 canonical classifications of characters of behaviour and motivation informs this. Within the TRPG, I often found myself just choosing evil for the sake of evil, even though this isn't really what Fern, my kobold, would actually do. It forced me to relate to the motivations and behaviours of my characters, while also providing an environment absolved of consequences, where I'm able to experiment with evil actions, social and unacceptable behaviours as well, like necromancy or manipulating shopkeepers for financial gain. I aim to use the systemization of alignment across mediums to illustrate how difficult it really is to play an evil character. Agency and negotiation within the TRPG is seen through the player, the DM, and the narrative as well. The systemization of choices and the moodic expectations of evil prompt us to act a certain way. For example, paladins are bound by a code of conduct that prompts them to be good. Deviation from this code of conduct means that their title will be stripped away. Within the CRPG, evil was so difficult to play due to the narrative requirements that made me need to recruit other characters. Actions that I played as Feyre caused companions to turn away. The result was a subtle, toned-down form of evil in accordance with the game's negotiations, not the evil that I wanted to play. We feel safe in the milieu that enables us what we wouldn't do in real life, like manipulating the shopkeepers or experimenting with destructive actions to gain power against our teammates. Alignment is shorthand for simplifying the complexities of human behaviour, allowing the narrative of the game to proceed more systematically. This is part of the built-in core mechanics of RPGs, as it provides us with agency to make choices within the ludic system. It offers more than a set of pre-programmed options. It offers us flexibility and the ability to socially negotiate. The agency between players, characters, DM, and the narrative is non-linear at all time. It's able to be shaped at any time during the campaign. The earliest roots of this lie in the war game, where goodness and evilness are unified through combat. It provides unity against a common adversary and is systemized through war and chaos. The war game demonstrated a framework that allowed players to be absolved of consequences within real life that later translated into alignment. Alignment is a landmark way of systemizing the experience of players seeking to explore narratives outside of Campbell's traditional storyline. Modern narratives today popularize the villain redemption arc and champion the anti-hero. They encourage players to branch out from the hero's journey stereotype. We now have a greater cultural sense of behaviours related to alignment. We have a generation that grew up with representations of morality in a different way. We have Twitch, YouTube, and completely new ways of watching D&D. In contrast, we also have the generation that grew up with the popularization of alignment, engaging in a new representation of D&D, different from what they knew, that championed the anti-hero. Representations play an active part in shaping and framing perceptions. Gerbner's media cultivation theory dictates that long-term exposure to this media shapes and internalizes our perceptions of the wider consumed media. This changing discourse evolves to encompass a wider player demographic that's perpetuated through representations of online play. Mainstream media is moving away from the classic hero and towards a more truthful representation of ourselves, evil. Some sources that aided in my understanding of evil and ethical and moral systems at play within my case studies are, for example, Huizinga's Homo Ludens. Rules governing morality are suspended within the magic circle or the new reality of the game world. A new social contract is formed and our conceptions of morality are irrelevant. Good and evil are determined within the confines of these ludic structures. We can observe alignment as we please and are absolved of all consequences within this gamescape. While our perceptions of good and evil may influence our response to alignment, the moral structure of this game remains unchanged. Our understanding of evil is influenced by pop culture tropes like Jungian archetypes. While the ludic structure and the confines of the magic circle prohibited play in Baldur's Gate, I could not turn down options for goodness. The help of others was integral to the winning conditions. I was reminded of all that I couldn't do in Baldur's Gate, but what I could do in Wild Beyond the Witchlight. I was absorbed utterly and intensely as the rules and actions lay in my hands, not in that of developers. Actions in RPGs are often judged by a simulated universal good or evil. Social simulations and NPCs can judge player actions, and Casas Roma depicts an alternative to the universal perspective of right and wrong. The source discusses that moral dilemmas are enforced by developers and they guide player behaviour towards goal achievement. Games are designed with the intention of encouraging players to interact with and engage with their rules. The simulated morality systems are instrumental in viewing Fern's actions through the judgment of the simulated world. While interaction with this world allows players to redefine the properties and contents of what they consider evil, Fern is considered by others to be good or neutral. Oblivion, for example, has a universal agreement of good and evil, such as stealing. NPCs can choose goal achievement over lawfulness though, like player characters. A low responsibility score of an NPC may mean that they steal food to feed their families. This is so different from many other RPGs where the player, and specifically scripted evil characters, only can violate norms in a way that the in-game morality system would judge as a violation. This informed my understanding of the God's eye view, or the universal moral system, and the way that Fern's evil actions might be perceived by NPCs and other player characters. In Oblivion, it's so easy to find loopholes in actually experiencing consequences for your actions. Yeah, you can find the ability to do evil without consequences. It's not hard. Henriksen dictates that in immersion into a new role, the fictional world allows the interaction and redefinition of properties, contents, and narratives. He details how learning by participation in roleplay allows us to engage in situations, and by Fern and Feyre's extension, moral and ethical dilemmas. Within my thesis, I used the research method of analytical autoethnography to answer my research questions, and as a result, take into account the partialities I have as a D&D fan and as a dual participant observer. This role allowed me to recognise the constraints both on the researcher and the player in experiencing ethics and morality. And here we have my theoretical framework with 3 facets of morality, ethics, and design inclusivity. Within moral systems, we have karma and morality as a social construct determined by developer ethics, normative ethics and the responsibility of developers in creating experiences that challenge ethical grayness, and how winning conclusions shape these. We also have player agency, mechanics and narratives, as well as sexism, ableism and racism in character creation and white fantasy. Role-playing is effectively a modern-day ritual, a narrative expanded from reality. Goffman's perception of play means that we co-create a world of meaning based on our frame of mind. It offers a new perspective for immersion into this adopted role, even though the magic circle means that our new reality of our fantasy world and the narrative and ludic structures change. As our structures change, so do our normal standards for classifying evil actions. As we learn from a young age, evil is a spectrum. Scar, from The Lion King, for example, moulded many children's perceptions of evil. He's greedy, he's full of hatred, jealousy, and he orchestrates one of the most painful, jarring deaths in Disney history, one of his own brother. Archetypal characters understand ways to act along a spectrum. They embody actions and behaviours from, say, petty to wicked. We understand how virtues are embodied through these characters. This is perpetuated by Carl Jung as he draws recognisable connections to common tropes within pop culture. Han Solo, for example, might be the outlaw, and Gandalf may be the sage. These are further represented through character classes in D&D. I'd like to end the presentation with an anecdote from the first session of the Wild Beyond the Witchlight campaign. As Fern, or myself, entered the grounds of the circus, I took note of all that stood before me. People carrying instruments hurrying to their changing rooms. As the moonlight began to set, my body lit up, red hot with hunger for a revenge on my family. They left me to fend for myself as a small child. The only person I could count on was my god, Tiamat. As I surveyed the circus tents and stalls ahead of me, I calculated my next move. Who was I going to wreak havoc on this time? When suddenly, somebody pulled up a chair next to me and lit up a cigarette. It was Nova. How's it hanging, twats? I froze. I surveyed my options, what little options I had. To be honest, I didn't actually think that I would get this far. Thank you.
Oh my god, this Tiamat, like an evil dragon.
Apparently he's not technically allowed to be because he's from the death domain, but oh well.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Do we have any questions about Hannah's presentation?
I've got one question.
Yes.
What would be what would an example of a recommendation be for games developers of either the tabletop D&D or a CRPG to allow players to explore evilness with a high degree of agency?
I think having those structures available, because a lot of video games, they have a pathway that you are supposed to follow in order to get to the end of the narrative or to get to the end of the game, whatever. But a lot of games just do not have that mechanic or that structure for the ability for you to be evil. It's like, yeah, okay, do all these things, get to the end, there you go. That's your experience of the character, is goodness or neutrality. And very, very little games actually offer the ability to be evil.
Why do you think that is? Because, you know, from your
Yeah.
examples, we know that it was in the past. Why do you think that's kind of disappearing?
I think it's a lot harder as well to implement the ability to be evil, because you not only have to have a pathway for people who want to be good, which a lot of people will choose the ability to be good or to just be neutral, and many people, because we intertwine that evilness of our characters with our own, a lot of people are turned off with the, you know, experience of evil. So I think as a developer, when you're weighing it up, it's like, oh, we can choose goodness, which most people will go towards, or we can choose evilness. Some people might do it, but it's a lot of work.
Just off the back of that,
Yeah.
if you obviously the thesis was about the players and about your autoethnographic experience of being an evil character in a setting that I haven't played the Witchlight campaign, but I understand is not necessarily a good or evil setting. Like you're not a heroic party sent to go kill a dragon or something.
It's quite neutral, yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever have any chats with your DM about enabling your evilness at all? Like I know the video game can only do so much, but did your DM have that chat with you?
I think I had a talk to him at the beginning that I wanted to play a somewhat evil character, but I didn't exactly kind of disclose how evil I wanted to be. But in that same vein, I didn't want to be so evil that it just put a damper on the whole campaign and it got in the way of other players. Like I said, you know, I want to play someone who's not entirely good, but not neutral either. Like have those kind of like that evil frame of mind. But then again, it led to a point where what is evil? Is evil betraying my teammates? Is evil letting my teammates die?
Maybe a combination of all of the above?
Yeah.
Because like Chris, I'd be interested to know why we've gone from allowing a plethora of alignments where we have like a subset of lawful, neutral, and chaotic evil archetypes that are encouraged into something that's a bit more, for lack of a better term, family-friendly, or much more like maybe selfish rather than evil, potentially.
Yeah.
And I'd want to know what the capacity for the game's mechanics as they're administered allow evil. So that would be the DM in a D&D game, but also, and leading to my other question, is did you look at how the developers of Baldur's Gate 3 considered evil? Like, are there any interviews where they say or talk about allowing evil or not allowing evil or anything like that? Was that part of the research?
When I did research, there was a Reddit thread where one of the developers on Baldur's Gate, he was just like, you know, ask me anything, whatever. Within that thread, somebody asked a question about diversity, not entirely about evilness, but about diversity. And he said, well, this game allows you to be whoever you want to be. You can, you know, all the character creation opportunities are plentiful. You can be this character, you can be this, you can be this, but didn't explicitly say what opportunities there were outside of, you know, what you look like, or what race you are, or what class you are. That was the extent of it, at least what I found.
So it sounds like they're more about you can be whatever you want to be if it's good, is the implication from what you're saying. Well, you can be whatever you want to be, dressing yourself up, but getting on our roller coaster ride that doesn't really let you get outside the car. That's kind of how you're framing it.
And that's a lot of what I explored in my case study too. It was, you can be whatever you want as long as it fits into the confines of how we want you to play.
Yeah, like obviously there'll be restrictions on what the game is programmed to allow you to do, but the mindset of what the developers think in making it, which is far more flexible in D&D, where you can just have a chat with your DM and go, I want to be evil.
Yeah.
It's an interesting juxtaposition where they're like, you can pick all the colours of the rainbow as long as they're from this box.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Any other questions for Hannah's presentation? Go for it, Brian.
So, how might you explore your own personal spectrum of evilness outside of the game environment through what you wear on above the neck, or what you create, fan work, artwork, what you write?
Yeah, most often I probably like to explore evilness through my D&D characters, because it's not something that I get to do in everyday life. I don't like being mean to people. I don't like saying no. I wear colourful clothes a lot. I do like wearing dark makeup sometimes too. So definitely through that. But I am very much a people pleaser. So I think through games I really like to explore, being evil and pushing people around, and something that I can't do in real life. Or don't want to.
Any other questions?
I don't have a question so much as a comment. Maybe it will come out as a question.
Yeah.
But it was just making me think about a lot of, RPGs. I can't remember. I want to say it's called Half-Life, but that's not correct. Maybe someone else knows. Where you're, playing a character in an online world, essentially as like a sim, and then you have things like metaverse. And it kind of made me think about the parameters we have around what you can do in those worlds to other people and other characters. And maybe that could be something to explore, to see why a developer is so uncomfortable giving you the ability to do things to other characters which would not be okay in the offline world.
Yeah.
Because there's been a lot of controversies around, like hurting people, stealing from people in these online worlds, which are online but mean a lot to people. So that's just something, I don't know, if you're thinking about exploring that.
Yeah, and even in your thesis as well, issues like censorship and freedom,
That's what it was making me think about.
freedom of speech. What can you actually say to people in the online world?
And what effect does it have, how do you argue or explain what effect that has on the offline person who's playing that character? And I think maybe going towards that is where you might find why people become uncomfortable with developing characters in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I like
Yeah.
that. Very cool. Thank you.
If there are no other questions, I have one last one, which is something of a semantic one. Do we need to call it evil? Is that part of the problem? Is that if we say evil, that comes with an immediate value judgment that what you're doing is antisocial, antithetical to being a people person, something that is malicious, destructive. There's no moral grey in evil. Evil is predominantly considered an absolute. So if we're looking at divergence in player behaviour away from being a goody two shoes, but that evil is, not the done thing, is there something else, and I'm not saying you have to have the term on you right now, but is there something else we need to come up with for exploring not good, anti-good behaviour without calling it evil? Is it just by what we call it or how we frame it that way?
I think that's a really, really interesting point, because there are a lot of connotations behind the word evil, and even when you think of words like petty or mean-spirited, they're different. They're not all, even synonyms of evil. They all mean very different things because they have different connotations attached to them. Maybe that is a wider issue, that we need to change the perception around the idea of evil, because it is very absolute. Evil is often seen as chaotic evil, you're mowing down innocent civilians, just being murdering people, being a horrible person all around together. When in reality, or not even in reality, in many cases, being an evil person isn't necessarily doing all those end of spectrum things, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, because evil can also be about manipulation and about not just eating babies, but about doing something a bit more subtle or a bit more,
Definitely.
beneath the surface. It doesn't have to be
100%.
burning a city down. to be
Yeah.
evil. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wonder if just we're caught on that turn as that expectation
Definitely.
of X, Y, and Z. Yeah.
Yeah.
Could be something to look into in a PhD.
Definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you again, Hannah. And
Thank you.